Årets Nobelpristagare brukar ju varje år samlas för att spekulera kring framtid och forskning, så också i år. Den här gången är pristagarna kring bordet 9 till antalet och platsen är Kungliga slottet i Stockholm.
Stockholms slott byggdes på 1700-talet på ruinerna av det gamla slottet Tre Kronor. Och det är det största i världen som fortfarande används med sina mer än 600 rum. I ett av rummen i den nordöstra flygeln är Bernadotte-biblioteket. Här så finns det 100 000 böcker. Och det är böcker som har tillhört kungar och drottningar under Bernadotte-dynastin. På den gamla tiden, för 130 år sedan, så fanns här ett snille anställt. Och det var August Strindberg. Han fick förnimmelsen att den här lokalen liknade en jättehjärna där tidigare släktens tankar hade samlats i fack. Någon bättre plats för snillen som ska spekulera kan väl knappast finnas.
Två av årets fysikpristagare, Vitali Ginzburg från Moskva och Alexej Abrikosov, också ryskfödd men verksam i USA, har fått priset för sina teorier om supraledning, ett fenomen som kan ha stor betydelse för framtidens teknik. Den tredje fysikpristagaren, engelsmannen Anthony Leggett, har sysslat med ett närbesläktat fenomen, suprafluiditet. Kemipristagarna. Peter Agri har upptäckt vattenkanaler i människokroppen. Roderick McKinnon har studerat våra jonkanaler. Medicinpriset delas i år mellan amerikanen Paul Lauterbur och engelsmannen Sir Peter Mansfield för deras teknik att avbilda människokroppens inre med magnetresonans. Och mottagarna av Riksbankens pris i ekonomisk vetenskap till Nobels minne heter i år Robert Engel och Clive Granger.
So how does invention, discovery, success evolve? How does the exploration work? Well, what's the impression? Is it life as a scientist in a white coat, or what's the reality? Peter Agre, what's life like for you when you're developing what you've developed?
Well, things sort of evolved slowly. I was a very happy medical specialist studying red cell proteins. I'm a hematologist, and we discovered something really by accident that had nothing to do with what we were looking for, and gradually put it together. And there was a point when we thought this might be a fundamental molecule involved in water transport, which it turned out to be, and suddenly obscurity sort of vanished.
Was it suddenly?
It was suddenly. We had worked for quite a while to clone and express a protein, and then the test was so simple. We put the oocytes that we brought, we expressed the protein into fresh water where they normally would lie dormant, and instead of lying dormant, they exploded.
Well, that's a scientific explanation, but what was that personal feeling when you got that eureka moment?
I have a permanent memory in my brain of the postdoctoral fellow coming down to my office, almost speechless, telling me the 6 control oocytes, nothing happened. The 6 test oocytes exploded like popcorn. And life was different from that moment on. We shared this with just a few colleagues at Hopkins, and by the end of the week we were getting phone calls from laboratories around the world asking for the plasmid. They wanted to work on this also. My sense was they wanted to share in the discovery, which seemed a little premature. So I think the discovery was thought out. I mean, it was a chance event, and it really fell from the blue into our laps, but life changed dramatically.
Rob McKinnon, is it about a humdrum existence as someone who's looking for that magical moment?
Well, it's It's certainly not a humdrum existence. It's anything but that. But, you know, you don't, personally, I don't go through looking for the magical moment, but when it happens, you feel it, and it's, there's nothing else quite like it. But even in the periods between discovery, or when you suddenly have a sense that you're, I guess the greatest feeling as a scientist to me is those rare times when you realize you're seeing something in nature for the first time that nobody else ever saw before, whether it be some structure or maybe the solution to an equation, just a sense that you're understanding some logic of nature, and you might be the first person to ever see that.
But one of the assumptions of many is it's a kind of humdrum existence, a relentless existence. Is it fun?
Oh, it's a lot of fun. I mean, what I say to students who come to work with me, and when I give lectures, that being a scientist is like being an explorer. You know, it's something like, a good analogy to me is you're let off on a new continent, and you're gonna go see what's there. And
you made one of your greatest discoveries, if that's the right word, as an explorer on a New Year's Day. How did that come about?
Yeah, well, that came about through, yes, this story that's become, you know, many people have heard it. That was through a long period of hard work, but there was one crucial moment where we did an experiment that would let us see a particular aspect of an ion channel, and that is whether ions are sitting in there and where do they sit. And although a lot of work went into leading up to that moment, actually it was a matter of, in a sense, on the computer focusing the, it's like taking a picture without focus, and then you go to the computer to focus the image. And it was about 2 o'clock in the morning when that image was first focused.
On New Year's Day?
Yes, on New Year's Day.
What were you doing there on New Year's Day?
Well, it's a long story. I went to the synchrotron with a few people from my lab, but because of the time of year, as soon as we got back, people dispersed appropriately. And in fact, my wife went up from New York to Boston, and I was in New York and had nothing to do. So, you know, I guess it sounds kind of bad, New Year's Eve, you know, there are things to do in New York City. But, and maybe it's a little bad to admit that, but I had a mood to go to the lab, and I started processing data. And in fact, that night, it wasn't a matter of, oh, I think there's a big result there. It was a matter of, I think I'll go process data and work on the computer. It's very quiet. There's certainly no one there. Worked on the data and worked on the data. And in fact, when I first graphed up the solution, I wasn't anticipating. And when it appeared in front of my eyes, you know, it's kind of a graph that you can step through the way I represented it. And when I put it up on the screen for the first time, I stepped through, and I immediately, you know, it's kind of like this, you know, stepping through saying, okay, yes, I have to work through these data, and I've now reached this point, and I'm hitting the key to step through the layers of the graph. And suddenly, what I saw, you know, was spellbinding, actually. And I in fact, became so shaky because of the excitement. I knew exactly what I was looking at. I couldn't hit the keyboard because I then wanted to convert this file into a different format where I could see it in 3D with the glasses, because I was looking at these flat maps, okay? And the funny part, well, you know, I'm a very good touch typer, but I couldn't use the keyboard because I was shaking so much. So to do this file conversion, I ended up taking one finger at a time and hitting the keys and, you know, making mistakes and starting over, and finally got this thing up in 3 dimensions, and, well, you know, with the goggles on. And it was, you know, you realize you're looking at a piece of nature, a little corner of nature that no one had ever seen before. And, you know, imagine that feeling. I think anybody could see that feeling if you have the sense that you're looking at some little aspect, you know, that no one's ever seen.
Rob Engel, can you get that kind of feeling in economics as well?
You know, I think you can. It works a little differently because we don't have nature out there, but we have all these puzzles. The economy, the data are very confusing. It's like an enormous, enormous crossword puzzle. And you think and you think and you think, how can I make sense out of this? And then all of a sudden, if you're lucky, and it doesn't happen that often, you can turn it around and say, oh, but if I think about it from this point of view, it all hangs together. It's a little bit like a lot of modern music that's all chaotic and you're getting all these crazy notes, and then there's a nice major chord at the end and you say, oh, it was all so simple. If only I'd thought about it that way. And I think you do get that.
Excitement.
Excitement.
Real challenge. Is
Absolutely.
it being an explorer, as
Definitely.
Rod's described?
Definitely.
Like actually going out onto the polar ice cap or something like that, not knowing what you're heading for.
It feels like that, and it feels like we get to go different places. You know, we can talk about macroeconomies, we can talk about financial markets, we can talk about global behavior, we can talk about individuals. There are so many different places where you can explore.
That was in New York. Clive, what about for you? Right across the United States, down in San Diego.
This is exactly the same phenomena, that we're in a situation where a lot of people are having trouble with certain type of data. And once we realized what the problem was, which was a very simple observation, we realized how to solve this problem. And we could resolve many different questions that was hanging around this area. We were working together at the time, so. And once we saw that, we knew we had an important discovery, because we knew that it would have impact not on just our work, but on the work of many other people.
Did you always think that you would make it, though, and you'd get this discovery?
No, not at all.
There was no inevitability about
not
it
at all. In fact, exactly the opposite. I thought we were in a very difficult area. We could make slow, little, incremental steps, and yet suddenly we got this major step. And once we got this step, and we published a little working paper, everyone saw this working paper, and the whole area just sort of evolved from it. People were working in this area, people were publishing.
All of a sudden we were worried we weren't even going to be the first ones in there, because
yes, exactly.
everybody else was picking up the ideas.
But you tried very hard to press publication in a number of journals, and they weren't interested. You had to push very hard.
We had to push pretty hard.
And suddenly you were the flavor of the month and the year, and everyone loved you.
Well, publication and having people pick up your work are not the same thing. Actually, we do a lot of work before things are published. Preprints are really where a lot of that happens.
But in the end, you had to press very hard to get your work published.
I did.
And suddenly, then, at that point, they said, they wanted possession of what you'd been writing,
right.
almost. Okay.
But then there was no risk to them at that point. I mean, it was clear it was going to be a success.
Let's look at physics. Vitaly Ginzburg, you've been researching, dare I say, for, what, 60 years one way or the other?
62.
62
65.
Years. All right, let's not argue about 2 or 3 years. What do you recognize about this great enthusiasm, this great eureka moment?
Many times I felt enthusiastic, but I possibly give one example. When I was young, it do not work after 65 for me in any case. I call this brainstorm. It is not correct. Brainstorm is something else. But in my case, I remember the following. I was ill, nothing to do, and I decided during 15 minutes to invent something. And I used this system many times and published 10 papers, nothing very great, I do not pretend, but some effects. For instance, one example I would say, I was going by train and somehow without literature or something like this. And I, as you know, work in low temperature. And I decided, and I also work in astrophysics, and I decided what we can see in astrophysics using low temperature. My first idea was about superfluidity of neutron stars. It was first. The superconductivity in white dwarfs, it is second. And superfluidity in neutrino degeneracy, if exists in the early stages of development of world. And it was afterwards published 3 papers in this connection. The most about superconductivity in white dwarfs, it is not interesting. About superfluidity in neutrino C, it is also doubtful. But about neutron stars is quite interesting. When I came back, I found that in neutron stars it is possible to have superfluidity and afterwards also superconductivity with proton component, and that there are vortex line, etc., etc.
But you recognize what Rod was saying about this being about exploration and about great enthusiasm.
In my case, it is simply use time for. But it is interesting that do not work after some some age.
So
I tried. And,
you need a
without any
deadline, do
success.
you? You need a deadline.
And now I even not try. Because you see, the fundament of such things is the following. I know something and I use, how to say, I use combination of which I know. It is not something new. It is application to other cases, something which I know already.
All right.
For instance, the case of neutron stars, as I
Much of
mentioned.
your work had to be done in the Soviet Union, in
Yes.
Soviet times. Could you be enthusiastic and excited about your discoveries in the Soviet Union?
Of course, you see,
Were you allowed to be emotional about it?
Yes, and why not? On the contrary, in Soviet time it is more enthusiastic because it was, I would give you a very good example. After this Cold War in 56 or 57, first time a large team of theoreticians came to Russia. And they was very astonished how enthusiastic we are, how many things we know. And one of them, well-known figure, but I don't wish to give his name, when he came back, he said, what is the explanation? The explanation is that they have nothing else. We was bad conditions, bad food, bad housing, etc. And
so adversity produces that.
It was his idea, but I see that he is, of course, correct, but only partly correct, because now I believe condition in some sense is better and enthusiasm is less.
All right, thank you. Well, Tony Leggett, what about your experience? I mean, after all, you've gone from Britain to America, to Illinois. What's been your experience? Share your enthusiasm and your discovery and your exploration with us.
Well, I do think that the analogy of physical exploration is a good one. In fact, when I was about 5 years old, my ambition in life was to be an explorer. In those days, there really were parts of the physical world which people had not gone to. And I guess as I got older, I realized that the physical world was getting more and more explored and mapped out and so forth. And so I do think that the intellectual challenge of going into new domains is analogous to that. Yes, I certainly have had at times the same eureka flashes of excitement.
The 10-minute exploration, the 10-minute discovery, like Vitaly.
No, it's not really a 10-minute discovery, I think. I would say, generally, typically what happens is that you have a problem which really challenges you and perplexes you, and you lie awake at night thinking about it, and maybe this goes on for several weeks. And then suddenly you do get a flash and see the thing from a completely different angle, and, well, it's a great moment.
Alexei Abrikosov, what about your view? After all, you've gone from Russia and you're now based in Illinois as well. What has been your experience, this great sense of elation and discovery at that moment when you've been working for so many years for something?
You know, it is actually the following, that I am very closely, and all my life I was closely connected with physical experiment. Although I am a theorist, I had close connections with experiment. And if I see in experiment, I'm interested not by every data and by fitting all the curves which they get from their experiments, but only in cases which I find unusual. And there is, for example, in experiment, I see something unusual. So then I try to understand it. And the eureka comes only if I come to some qualitative understanding of what is happening there. So then I go to my desk and make careful calculations whether this fits or not. Sometimes it does, not always it does. If it does, so then I am happy, and then I can go to the next step. And I consider what are consequences of all that. However, it is very important to see very attentively at what experimentalists have done and so on, and to keep them in mind, and sometimes for a pretty long time. Because, for example, once I was in Canada and I heard about some experimental facts. The people there didn't understand them, and I also didn't understand them. But at that time, I was not thinking about these experiments and so on, and it lasted several years until I discovered something else. And then I thought that how would it be manifested in those experiments which were done in Canada. And I saw that, and I explained that. And then I made calculations and everything fitted. But when I explained that to the people in Canada, they did not accept my explanation. And the reason for that was that there was already a lot of different explanations, which were much worse than mine and much less clear. However, they have become fashionable, and therefore the people didn't want to go out.
Sir Peter Mansfield, your pioneering work with Paul was 30 years ago. You defied many of the skeptics. How were you able to just push ahead with this science and succeed in a way which really amazed a lot of people?
I think historically, my interests in this particular area of imaging arose out of work that I was doing prior to the sort of late 60s or thereabouts. And I was greatly influenced by some of the theoretical calculations that people were doing at the time using such things as green functions. And I had this interest to see whether I could somehow or other utilize this sort of theoretical work to look at structures. I started off by looking at solids, and it soon became obvious that what one needed, in addition to the sort of mathematical expertise, that one needed to actually be able to remove interactions in solids in some manner.
But let me press you, if I can, on the issue of funding and what the average scientist was thinking, even those you went to for money. They said, we don't believe this will ever work, and you had a real uphill job. And now so many people rely on magnetic resonance and your work.
Yes.
With the MRI machines. You've defied those skeptics, and you did so many years ago. Why were you able to defy them?
I was able to defy them because we could produce the results. But, I mean, there's nothing like a positive result to actually inspire some interest and confidence in what one is doing.
Was it an uphill job?
It was, but, you know, I was trying to explain to you, first of all, that there was a sort of mathematical framework to our particular approach in doing this. And in trying to remove interactions in solids, which are, you know, there as part of nature, was one of the questions that we had to, first of all, consider and somehow manage to do this. And having removed those interactions in solids, we then could then apply our own interactions in solids externally. And that was in the form of a magnetic field gradient. And once one had achieved that, it was more or less a straight road to various types of imaging which followed thereafter.
But in the end, you still had to convince the scientific community, Paul Lauterboy. You had to convince people out there that what you'd done was an amazing, major breakthrough, including the business people.
That kind of convincing was not quick. I also had the problem that when some Nobel laureates heard about my work, they thought it must be impossible. And you have to really believe that what you're doing is not that bad before you can withstand that kind of pressure. But it grew out of the work that I was doing from education and work previously entirely as a chemist, that I knew how nuclear magnetic resonance worked and how it could be used. And it was a stimulus of a biological problem that caused me to wonder whether there was something that could be done that had never been done before, that is to find out where inside a complex object a nuclear magnetic resonance signal emerged. And so I was away from home at that time, serving temporarily as a president of a small instrument company that was in trouble. And I went out to dinner with a friend who's here at this affair this week, and was explaining to him, as he recalled recently, that ideas that other people had had for studying biological systems were ridiculous, because you could not make a uniform enough magnet for their suggestions to work on an entire human being, for example.
Did that drive you even harder, the fact that he was saying it couldn't be done?
Well, I was saying it couldn't be done, but I interrupted myself to say the non-uniformity of the magnetic fields is not the problem, it's a solution to the problem. That was my epiphany, that what was uniformly regarded as a condition that made experiments like this unthinkable actually made them possible. And so that was something that struck me so much at the time that I went out and bought, I was away from my laboratory, I went out and bought a notebook and wrote down the idea in it and had it witnessed by this friend. So there was a record of it. And so I very much recognize this, the effects that other people have reported, that suddenly something that brings together everything that you've been working on for a long time, a subject you know very well, you see it in a different light.
But you had to pitch, you with Sir Peter had to pitch it time after time in lectures.
Well, I had to develop it myself in my own laboratory. I had no funding. I had to do it all with my own two hands. And there was, I eventually got some undergraduates to help. They're not experts, but they're brave. So they're easier to convince that one could do an unconventional experiment than more mature scientists, including Nobel laureates.
But Sir Peter, this business of going out there and pitching your science, getting it accepted, yes. That was a relentless business that you had to go through.
That was an uphill struggle.
I had to develop my ideas more clearly because of the that is one way in which disbelief and opposition help you.
But Sir Peter, you were getting resistance, were you, from the scientific community to what you believed you had discovered?
It wasn't resistance in a sort of very bad sense, but what it required is to put time and effort into spreading the word. And I do remember very clearly in those early days going to conferences outside of Britain, in America, in Europe, all over the place. And at one point I was out of the country, actually physically out of the country, more than 45 days in 1 year, which may be small to other people around the table, but to me at the time it was an enormous effort to take these ideas. I felt like a sort of standard bearer, traveling here, there and everywhere, saying this is how it should be done, you know, and it was exciting, but it was wearing as well.
All right, Peter Agre, is there a misfit here, a misperception of what you're doing, the kind of work you're doing?
In terms of how the public sees us, yeah, I think the public probably sees us somewhat stereotyped. Maybe this is based on Hollywood or something. I think they often will think of scientists as being short-bearded little men with thick glasses and odd accents who really are consumed with something unrelated to the real world. Anybody like that present? No.
Is it really like that, do you think?
I think scientists are like all other kinds of people. There may be a fundamental trait that they love to go to work. I'm not sure you could say that about most accountants and lawyers. They love to go to work on Saturday.
And you really love to go to work, do you?
Yes, yes, but there are limits. I mean, Rod was there on New Year's Eve working, having a great time. I think there are limits, though. I mean, maybe we wouldn't miss work to go play golf, okay? So maybe we're different from accountants and lawyers. But I don't think scientists would trade work for, trade sex for work. You know, if you have that choice, then I think scientists are much like other people. I think the public interpretation is probably not so accurate.
But what about the public perception here? What about the public perception, Clive?
In California, I'm going to give a boost to my own university. We spent a lot of effort in educating the California taxpayers into the benefits that they get from having a good university.
How do you do that?
Feeding the press all the time and interviews on the radio and mentioned on television. Many people in the, not everybody, but many taxpayers understand that there are benefits from having a university. There are offshoot companies nearby the universities. The wine industry in California is almost entirely due to the research at Davis and so on. A lot of the Silicon Valley has benefited from other parts of the university and so on. And so there's this continual news flow from the university through the publication department into the press.
And there is a positive linkage there, is there? In other words, it affects the image of however you describe a scientist.
In my opinion, because my contrast is with Nottingham, I haven't been in Nottingham many years, but in Nottingham when I was there, the people in Nottingham had no idea what that thing up on the hill was. And we could have been in prison for all they knew, as far as what went on inside it. And that was a very bad link. There was no, maybe much better now because there's much more dynamic leadership at the university now, but in my day it was not. And I think that this is a matter of the university putting out the effort to put scientists, and all academics actually, in a good light.
I'm mystified though. I mean, when you look at something like a mobile phone, people maybe have a low opinion of scientists, but actually the speed at which a mobile phone changes depends on scientists in laboratories, technicians and so on. Yet it doesn't seem to register with the people who are using this thing, expecting more and more developments more rapidly, almost exponentially. Rod, what's your view?
Well, I think people take things for granted. I mean, we tend, as a species, we tend to respond to necessity, don't we? So I think if things are fine for what we immediately need, we don't make the connection, where did this come from?
Should they? Should people make that connection?
Well, I think a little bit like what Clive just said, I think it would help to point out to people that in fact, when we look at the society around us and the way we live, this has to do with scientific advances that have happened. Every aspect of our life has been so influenced by science. Why, you know, I don't blame people for not getting up every morning and saying, "Oh, I'm glad the light went on," and I'm you know, not. But all of this advance is based on science, and I think scientists and public relations people at universities, it would help to point this out and make, you know, educate, and people would be more aware and maybe more tolerant of you know, realizing that science makes advances, but it does take time. Can't expect it to happen overnight.
Vitaly, what do you think about this? Because you've seen the massive change.
I do not understand why people do not respect science. Every day they see the achievements and how they can not understand that they have to be obliged to scientists. I don't understand. It is something in human nature. Because human is in fact animal, so possibly it is some animal instinct. I don't understand this absolutely.
Well, Rob, you've done work in economics, which is analysing risk and everything, and the way things change, volatility. Is there something to be analysed here about why people don't understand the values of science and what it's giving them?
You know, there is a movie which I saw not too long ago, which really struck me as capturing a lot of this. And actually, there are probably several others, but the movie October Sky is about a young boy growing up in West Virginia coal mining town. And he sees the Sputnik go over, which I remember as being a tremendously influential
Remind us about the Sputnik.
The Sputnik was the first satellite that was launched, and it was a Russian satellite. And in the US press, there had been this belief, I guess, that Russian science was not as advanced as American science. But there it was, going over the sky, flashing lights, and it was a breathtaking moment because this new frontier had opened. It had opened with science that we didn't know very much about. And all my friends and I thought science was just an exciting place to go. There were all these things to be done. There was, I'm afraid, the Cold War going on, which was part of it, I suppose. But the idea that there was this new frontier was extraordinary, and I thought this movie captured it very well. I don't know whether young people feel that way today about the frontiers that are available, but some of them certainly do.
Because the latest polling shows that really the esteem in which they hold scientists has gone down from about 66% to around 50% now in the last 20 years. In other words, a falling off. Tony Leggett, I mean, from your position, you're a Brit now in America with American citizenship.
Yeah.
When you think of something like the shuttle disaster, or the 2 shuttle disasters there have been, does that in its own way have its impact on the perception of science?
Well, obviously it does. That was a major tragedy which was produced, if you like, by inadequate science. Another thing that's had a very negative impact clearly are the recent scandals regarding falsification of data and so forth. But I think that part of the problem in persuading people of the value of science may be that they do tend to see it as a kind of activity which is totally decoupled from the world of ordinary life, just as they do tend to see scientists as people who are different from other human beings. We're not different from other human beings, and what we're doing is not really very different from the kinds of thing we do in everyday life. It's just an attempt to, in some sense, make it more disciplined and systematic. So I think the idea that science as such, or scientists, have some special recipe which enables them to attain success with 100% certainty is very misleading and very deleterious to our image. We're really just ordinary people trying to, in some sense, apply an extension of ordinary logic in a more disciplined and organised way.
Tony, can I ask you, do you think it's possible that the public perception, I mean, if we're down to 50%, we're almost as low as politicians. I mean, I'm alarmed. Is it possibly because we don't have scientists who are in the public life? We don't have a Richard Feynman now, or a Linus Pauling, someone who connects. People recognize them on the street. I mean, there are popular songs about them. I don't think there are that many songs about Rod. No, there should be.
Well, how would you feel? How would you feel if there are songs about you for the Nobel Prize that you've won here in Stockholm?
Well, there was one, actually. Garrison Keillor sang about me, but I don't want to sing it now.
No, but seriously, Peter, if suddenly you became an icon, how would you feel about that affecting your standing?
Well, I was talking about some other icons, you know. Vitaly, you'd be a great icon.
Well, if you became a symbol of science in Russia, and a very popular symbol, would that be important? Would that generate a new enthusiasm among the younger generation?
Possibly, but I would be very dissatisfied to be an icon. I dislike this thing. I also dislike such attention to Nobel Prizes, I would say.
So
too much.
He's the perfect one because he doesn't want the attention. He doesn't need the attention.
But Peter, you've avoided the question I put to you. Would you like to become an icon, as you've raised this, as a Nobel laureate now, who could go out there and spread the gospel?
Well, I guess I'd feel a little inadequately trained, but someone has to do it. And I think there may be someone better there. But if it came down to me or nobody, I'd do my best.
So, Peter,
I'm not afraid to look stupid in public.
How would you feel, given that you have 60 million people who are benefiting each year with what you and Paul developed on magnetic resonance, as a symbol of what can be achieved?
Yes, I certainly wouldn't want to be an icon, but I would like to just mention the fact that over the last couple of months, I've received dozens, hundreds of letters from many, many people who have benefited from MRI, but didn't know the involvement of Paul and I in this whole business. And some of these letters are extremely sad, you know, describing the illness that they've got and how they've had treatment and so on. And generally speaking, they're, you know, absolutely grateful and pleased to be able to write to the people who created all this. And in that sense, we have an advantage possibly over some of the other people around the table whose work is not affecting people in this very personal way. I mean, that's, I think, an extremely important aspect of this discussion right now, that, you know, the personal involvement, if any of us around this table or any of the friends that we know, relations and so on, have to be examined medically by MRI, they will immediately see the benefits. And, you know, this has an automatic effect, which, from my point of view, is extremely pleasing. I mean, I don't go around saying, you know, we did this and we did that, but it's extremely nice to know that there is this appreciation.
But hearing what Clive's experience is in Southern California, there you've got a direct correlation between the information getting out on the air, being available in newspapers and television stations, popularising it. Do you feel uncomfortable? Would you feel uncomfortable, Sir Peter and Paul, about the popularising of what you've done in order to make the point that this is exciting and this is what science can produce?
Well, it's a little difficult to deal with because psychologically it's a very different culture from the one that made your work successful in the first place. It's a matter of thinking differently, appreciating different things, and being some kind of a celebrity has nothing to do with how you got here. That is not what was making the difference, whether one did good work or bad work or was enthusiastic. It's a different kind of culture to deal with.
But the kind of thing that Peter is proposing is really an anathema to the kind of life you've been leading and has led to your success.
Science looks very different from the inside and from the outside. And the general public, by the very nature of things, cannot see it the way a working scientist does every day. They don't know, even my own family doesn't know why I still go into work 7 days a week, because I know of nothing that is more fun and more interesting than doing that. And this is a different way of living than people with regular professions or jobs are used to.
Okay, but how, from here we are sitting around the table in the King's Library in Stockholm, how can we send a message that actually science is fun and science is something which can attract you and make people feel energized? Rob?
You know, I loved the books that George Gamow wrote when I was growing up. He's the one that got me interested in cosmology and astronomy. And I think science writers can talk to scientists and describe in a way better than we can, perhaps, the excitement that we feel. And I think actually there's a great opportunity for exciting science writing as well as journalism to talk about this sort of thing.
Alexei, what do you think? I mean, you have a critical position in the Argonne National Laboratory there in the Midwest. What's your view about how you take out that message, not to the scientists who've come to study with you, or the students who've come?
You know, since you mentioned Argonne, so I want to tell first how it is done in Argonne. In Argonne pays a lot of attention towards popularizing scientists and advocating science among people and so on. So they make special days where everybody can come to Argonne, and many people really come, and they make special exhibitions for that, and people are standing, people are explaining what is being going on, and so on. Also, articles in the local newspaper are very common, and so on.
But it really does work, does it? Or is it just about the laboratory feeling good about having had this kind of openness?
Many kids actually, they also have some special popular courses for kids. Many kids come to that and so on. So that activity is very good, and I didn't see in Russia, where I was before, anything of this kind. So much popularization of science, which is done in Argonne, I have never seen anywhere at all. Yes, when I was in Russia, actually, I did a lot for popularizing science because I wrote articles in leading newspapers, even not only popular journals, and so on. And so therefore, people knew me maybe personally a little bit more than other people. However, But
is it about knowing you as a symbol, or is it about understanding your science and what you represent and what you've been working on?
No, understanding science, they can understand in a very, very general way. My particular science is complicated. Theoretical physics is complicated. And so it is difficult to understand but in a general way, they can understand, of course. Now, I can tell you the following, that my teacher Landau was an extremely kind of genius in theoretical physics. Yes, but most of the people did not know about his existence. And only after he had that car accident, he suddenly became known. And I don't know, millions of people in the country suddenly realized that there was a genius among us. and we did not even suspect about his existence.
All right, Peter, but you raised this right at the beginning. Is this about household names? Is that really the way? Because, as we've heard from Peter and Paul, they don't really want to do this kind of stuff.
No, I think Alexei hit on an important thing. Children need to know about science. So I think education in schools, showing that science is fun and exciting to school children, and that's when I learned to do science, in my father's laboratory when I was a little kid. But I think once they've gotten introduced to this and they realize it's fun, I think we do need role models. I think we need someone who is visible. I'd nominate Rob here. Outstanding ice dancer. He looks great in a suit. He looks great with an open collar. I bet he could communicate.
But no one's nominating you at the moment.
No, I'm a coward.
I think you're going to be I think you'll be the rock star of science.
I'm not sure about that. But I think people do connect with a name, a person, someone they can see. I mean, we're living in a televised era. Yes. I think Abraham Lincoln would not succeed presently because he couldn't carry that. Someone else could, maybe Thomas Jefferson would have been great in front of a camera. But I think the people would respond to an individual, someone who could communicate complicated ideas. What Alexei does is very complicated, but the principles of science are not so complicated. They're usually very simple and elegant. And if the people hear that, they'll feel that they can understand it.
That is so amazing when you see it. The complication is actually not the fruit of science. It's the beauty and the simplification, it seems to me, that is so amazing.
I think there's a case really for the film industry being much more closely involved, because I remember a whole series of films after the last World War, including the story of DNA, which was made into a very nice film. And I learned a lot just simply, as a young person going to see that film. I learned about, also through the film industry, about the development of supersonic aircraft.
But October Sky was just that. It was a terrific movie, not a widely released movie. Yeah. But it really did a great job.
But, it's a matter, I think, of getting the film industry much more interested in doing these biopic movies, which appeal to a lot of people. And, I love these films. And when they're re-shown again, as they quite often are on the BBC TV in Britain, I always make a point of making sure I'm available to see them. Even if I've seen it 3 times, I'll watch it again.
Rod, before we assembled here, you said you wanted to make the point that really science is fun, and that's the way it should be seen, sitting around drinking wine and so on. Why is there still this image, even for someone like, after all, you're 40 years younger than Vitaly here, why is there still, among your generation and the next generation, this image?
That it's not fun? I really don't know. I'm not sure why that is, because it's so much fun. We started out by talking about exciting moments, and people might think, oh, those moments, sure, I can understand why they're exciting, but how about all that time in between? But actually, all that time in between is fun. Because as a scientist, you have colleagues, people you work closely, they have friends who you work with, and you think about ideas, and you start to know each other, and you start to recognize the face of your colleague.
Students?
Students. That's who I'm...
Good ones are always appreciative of what they can learn in your laboratory, and appreciation
yes.
Is a very stimulating feature of working in academia, for example. That it makes a difference, and I always keep undergraduates working with me in the university because I can see how they can develop into an understanding of what science is really like and what can be in it for them. And they see it as best they can from the inside, as I was saying, so that they can see that it's all interesting, success and failure, frustration and joy. They all come together into a mixture that is extremely stimulating, and everyone likes a certain amount of stimulation.
I wish to mention that, in my opinion, the government, educational ministry, etc., must make a great effort to popularize science. We, the 3 of us, members of Russian Academy, wrote to our president and asking to help in edition of scientific popular literature, etc. We receive no answer. And I wouldn't write again to President. But my opinion is that every good democratic government must think about popularization of science, about popularization on television, etc. Now in Russia, nothing really is done. Somebody do something, other do other. Nobody thinks about it. Have to be. It is a political question. We have to be. We must think about it, do something, and not put it to flow voluntarily without any rule.
Well, with Clive and Tony, of course, you're both, if you like, émigrés from Britain, where scientists are up in arms about the British situation with a lack of funding.
Right. And rightly so. I mean, they're getting worse off all the time in Britain. In the US, the economists are not doing particularly well. I think the scientists are doing not so bad. That's my opinion.
Yes, I was just going to remark that I think that in the US, this problem of communicating science to the general public is taken very seriously by many of the relevant branches of government, and in particular if you apply to the National Science Foundation, for example, for funding for a big inter-institutional centre, as we did a few years ago, it is usually an integral part of the arrangement that you have adequate outreach programmes like the one that Alexei described at A&L. Whether these are organised in the right way, whether we're doing things as efficiently as could be done, I don't know, but certainly the problem is being taken very seriously.
Can I make some small remark?
Rob.
I was going to say, I think another thing that we could do, and should be made more clear, is that the road to science is not so hard as people think. It seems that only the most brilliant student could possibly make it all the way from primary school up to science. But in fact, people who are brilliant at the beginning are not always the ones that make the greatest contribution. And what looks like such a hard road is actually an interesting set of adventures that you go through. And you don't have to be the most brilliant person to do that. And so I think that we don't...
Creativity is the issue that can't be tested.
You can't test that, you know, and so the people that think that they're going to do science are the ones that are very good at regurgitating what we teach them, whereas a lot of times the people who are not quite as good at that are actually going to be better scientists.
All right, let's just conclude our discussion here in Stockholm with a question about what you think the next breakthrough might be. Now, Paul, you've actually said that the way to ask this question is actually to ask Nobel laureates what is not possible. Then we will know what the next breakthrough is. What's your view of what the next breakthrough is?
Well, I sometimes have that view.
In other words, what's not possible?
You mean in science breakthrough?
Indeed.
That is really just an anecdotal way of referring to the fact that there is no good answer to the kind of question that a journalist will sometimes propose. What is the next great development that you cannot even conceive of? This is hardly a fair question. I think all the tales we have heard around here are about people who have thought about things in a way that has not been done before. And that is what everyone hopes for and wants to do, and if they're successful in doing science, they have done what to their predecessors was inconceivable.
Can any of you see a major breakthrough coming, which really most people are not even believing is there?
What do you mean by major? Do you mean commercial?
It's for you to quantify it.
3D television?
In science or in what?
In science, in the disciplines where you have been honoured.
Three-dimensional television, drugs that increase intelligence, not decreased intelligence.
How is that going to affect economic activity if it changes intelligence?
Oh, it'll change behaviour incredibly.
In other words, your science will change.
Yes.
We'll
because
probably have to outlaw it.
In your field, Tony?
Well, I suspect that sometime in the next half century or century, we are going to see a radical modification of the general belief that the laws of physics, as we have discovered them on the laboratory scale and so forth, apply to the universe as a whole. I don't know in which direction this will happen, but I would take a bet that it will happen.
Vitaly, Alexei, what view are you taking of what might lie ahead?
I think we both agree that next breakthrough will be room temperature superconductivity.
In physics, yes, but I think that the biological development is much more important for mankind than even room temperature.
What do you mean by that?
No, something life, not... I am 87, but I would like be 187, and it will be possible.
Is that imminent?
No, not imminent, but it is a possibility. It's very interesting.
What about in chemistry?
I think the chemistry of life, I mean, I think the next, not as a single aha breakthrough, but in biochemistry for the past 100 years, the experiment begins with putting the tissue in the blender and homogenizing it. And really,
what do you mean by that?
You know, you study the individual component all by itself, but actually imagine it, we're a bag of chemicals and we're sitting here having this conversation. There's some amazing stuff happening here, isn't there? And in order to understand that, we have to understand how those components come together and interact with each other. So for almost the whole past, we've been isolating each component. Like in the potassium channel, I talk about this one little element actually all by itself in its chemistry. But actually the essence of life is going to come through the feedback in the way these components interact with each other. And I think that's the chemistry of life in a sense. When we start to see how the interactions of these components happen is going to be magic.
Peter? In medicine?
Well, I was going to say, I go along with what Tony said to some extent, that I think the theory of everything is the one area where there is going to be a major breakthrough, and it would be just nice if that could be turned into an experimental science, because from what I see about the string theory and so on is that it does seem to be just beyond the edge of practicality, and that is something that I think needs to be further.
I understand what is the theory of everything.
All right, and finally, Peter, given that you said that science is really the one thing that keeps you going.
Yes, I'd like to make two specific suggestions. I think areas that research will make a big difference and will happen soon, not because of corporate interests or the treatment of tropical diseases, malaria, 3 million children dying a year. And it'll be the work funded by private agencies. I think that'll be important. And I think reproductive biology, some method for maintaining populations and not having overpopulation in poor areas. I think these are areas where advances will occur.
Well, to all of you, thank you very much indeed for those insights, particularly about what is happening now and also into the future. Maybe we can reassemble in a few years' time and find out if these kind of indications of what breakthroughs could be happening have actually been achieved in that very short time span by scientific standards of maybe just a few years. From all of us here in the King's Library in Stockholm and from me, Nick Gowing, thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Don't schedule it before.
Fler Nobelpristagare spekulerar imorgon. 4 forskare som fått priset tidigare samtalar i Nobelforum 23:00 imorgon. Närmast ikväll nyheter från Aktuellt.